For this third lecture, so we've already covered our first lines of defense, which are the skin and the mucous membranes, and we talked about some of the chemicals that are present there that help eliminate lots of microbes before they can ever go beyond those linings and invade deeper into the body. But what happens when microbes do get past the skin and mucous membranes? When that happens, then we have these second lines of defense that kick in and eliminate the vast majority of microbes almost right away. The second lines of defense consist of cells and processes that are involved in this branch of our immunity. And so again, keep in mind, everything that we've really been talking about so far, these are non-specific defenses. And again, that just means they work against lots of different kinds of microbes. They're not targeted to very specific types of microbes, like particular strains of the flu or salmonella bacteria or whatever. Present at birth, second lines of defense kick in right away. Now we know that newborn infants and young children, their immunity is not as strong as our immunity is, but they still have these second lines of defense. They're available at birth, but that just illustrates for you how important it is to have the third lines of defense as well, because sometimes when in the case of pathogens that are really good at causing disease in humans, they get right past these first and second lines of defense and cause infections and harm anyway. So as part of your second lines, there are cells that are parts of our second lines of defense. Antimicrobial chemicals of various most of them are proteins, and some of those we've already discussed, the ones that are present in the skin and the mucous membrane barriers, like your defensins and dermacidins, but those overlap into some of these deeper tissues as well. Then processes, things like inflammation and fever, are aspects of these second lines of defense as well. All right, this is a pretty good little diagram from your textbook, because it's highlighting for you the overall goal of your immune system. And this is what it is over here, goal of your immune system. Attack and destroy things that are foreign to the body. So what they're kind of showing you here in a generic way, you have these various kinds of white blood cells that probe cells in the body and other types of substances that make their way into the body. And your immune system has to learn, what's your cells, what are your molecules and tissues and so forth, so that they don't react to them. So they probe them, but they don't kill them. You don't kill your own tissues. And your tissues and cells and so forth, when you're covering the immune system, is referred to as self. And if you notice this term down in here, self-antigens. Antigens are molecules that generate reactions by your immune system. And we do have antigens on our cells and tissues. If my cells and tissues were transplanted into another person who is not a good match, that other person's immune system would attack my antigens. But normally your immune system is not supposed to attack its own antigens. It learns how to recognize you, self, and is not supposed to attack those types of things. When that happens, you have an autoimmune disease, a self-immune disease. Auto means self. All right, now when your immune system detects something that's foreign to the body, like a microbe here in pink, the ultimate goal is to have that, whatever it is that's foreign to the body, phagocytosed. You take it in, you destroy it, you digest it and degrade it. And we've talked about phagocytosis before. So keep in mind as we go through these different topics, as we're covering the immune system, the overall goal is generally to find things that are foreign to the body and have them phagocytosed, engulfed by your phagocytic cells, and they need to be destroyed and eliminated from the body. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about with your second lines of defense are various weapons of the second line, and many of those are cells that are present there. So if you've had Biology 202 before, you have learned about the major components of your blood. The liquid portion, or the fluid portion, is referred to as the plasma. And so that's water plus many, many, many kinds of dissolved solutes that are present in there. And some of the solutes in there, these are all solutes that are present in your plasma, include clotting factors that go through that coagulation cascade you learn about in AMP2 that causes blood clots to form. That's obviously important for immunity because it helps to seal off wounds. There are proteins in our blood that transport iron, specifically called transferrin proteins. And all of our cells need iron, but you don't generally want your iron just floating around. You don't want your iron ions floating around in your body fluids. And instead, they're transported by proteins that kind of shuttle them around to the various cells of your body and drop the iron off to cells that need them. That's important because bacteria use iron as well. Iron is used by some of the enzymes of cellular respiration. So all living things have to have it. Well, I'll say most living things have to have iron. And the reason we have these iron transport proteins in our blood is because if we shuttle iron around hidden inside these proteins, then if bacteria get into our blood or other tissues, they don't have access to as much iron. The iron is hidden inside those proteins. Then there's a system of proteins, antimicrobial proteins, that are referred to as the complement system because it complements or helps out other branches of immunity. And we'll talk a little bit about that system later. Cytokines in the blood cytokines are like the hormones of the immune system. They're signaling molecules. They're signaling molecules that either ramp up or tone down immune responses to microbes that have invaded the body. And then we have antibodies. Antibodies are actually protein weapons that are generated by your third lines of defense. They float around in your plasma. They get out of the blood and into your tissue fluids. And as we'll see, they have several different things that they do that help us eliminate foreign things from the body. But they kind of function like tags, as we'll see. They tag things that are foreign. Hey, this is foreign. Get over here and phagocytose this nasty, evil bacterium and get it out of the body. So those are all solutes because they're molecules, mostly proteins that are in your blood plasma. These are considered to be blood cells or cell fragments, and they include your erythrocytes. Those are your red blood cells. Those are present in the blood. Your thrombocytes are also known as your platelets, and they're not really cells. They're just little pieces of cells that contain lots of molecules that are involved in the blood clotting process. Then leukocytes, of course, are your white blood cells. And these guys, your leukocytes, these are your main warriors of the immune system. And here's a depiction of these different types of blood cells. Or when you've taken Biology 202, you probably learned the term formed element. That's a substitute for blood cell. And red blood cells are not true cells either. They don't have a nucleus. They're really just mostly bags of hemoglobin. Your platelets are not true cells. They're little fragments of a larger cell that broke apart in your bone marrow, and they're basically just little fragments that are involved in blood clotting. So because those aren't true cells, they're sometimes called formed elements. But then over here you see your 5 types of white blood cells that you learn about. Basophils, neutrophils, eosinophils, monocytes, and lymphocytes. So we'll be talking more about the functions of these as we cover the immune system. The ones that are really your main warriors for the second line are these guys. Your basophils, your neutrophils, your monocytes, and your eosinophils. They're all second lines of defense warriors. Third line of defense mainly your lymphocytes over here. Lymphocytes can be divided up into two major categories, B and T lymphocytes, or B and T cells, and they're the main warriors of the third line defenses. We'll see the monocytes over here overlap and play roles in your third line as well. This is a pretty nice diagram from your textbook, which shows you an overview of blood cell development in the bone marrow. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this topic in micro because you guys cover this when you take A&P2. But as you learn there, all of your blood cells develop in the bone marrow. And up here at the top, this is basically a development pathway here for your blood cells. And up here at the top, there is a type of stem cell in the bone marrow, which is an unspecialized blood cell. And those are the source, those are the stem cells from which all of your other types of blood cells are derived. So depending on what your needs are, those stem cells, which are also called hematopoietic stem cells, or in biology 202 you learn them, they're called hemocytoblasts. Hopefully that's a little bit familiar to you. And depending on what your needs are, what types of new blood cells do I need? These cells divide over and over and over again. They do mitosis. And some of them partially specialize into what's called a myeloid stem cell. And then others partially specialize into what's called a lymphoid stem cells. So at this point, they still haven't taken on a special job, but they've taken the first step down that pathway. And then again, depending on what your needs are, these cells over here, these myeloid stem cells, will divide over and over and over again. And many of them, the majority of them, go on to become red blood cells. You need lots and lots and lots of those all the time. A whole bunch of them become platelets that you see here. And then others become these white blood cells that are the main warriors of your second lines of defense. And those include your neutrophils, your basophils. I think I wrote over the names there. Neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils. Those are big time important warriors of your second lines of defense. Your monocytes, right there, that's a fourth type. All four of those types of white blood cells have this same ancestor up here. And if you look at, like when you were taking Biology 202, you probably remember the diagrams which showed all the different steps that these cells go through before they become things like red blood cells and neutrophils and basophils and eosinophils. It's a multi-step process, and we're not going to get into those details here. This is just illustrating for you all of your blood cells develop in the bone marrow originally, and they all come from the same primitive type unspecialized stem cells that are always located in your bone marrow. All right, this other type of stem cell over here is called a lymphoid stem cell. So once those develop, the only thing they can turn into, they can keep dividing over and over again, and depending on your needs, some of those will become T cells and some will become B cells. Those cells are the main warriors of your third line of defense. And then there are some other cells here that are actually derived from the bone marrow that play other important roles in immunity. Your mast cells, those are stationed in your tissues and play an important role in detecting injury and infection. Dendritic cells, we already talked about those, how they're sitting in your skin. You also have them in your mucous membranes as well, and they're derived from the bone marrow. The monocytes become monocytes in your blood, a type of white blood cell. They become most of the macrophages in your tissues. So in the blood, they're called monocytes. In your tissues, they're macrophages that wander around and find things that are foreign to the body. And then there's another type of cell over here derived from the bone marrow, and these are present in your blood also. They're called natural killer cells, and we'll talk a little bit about what those do. Those are hunters. They look for cells in your body that have bacteria or viruses in them, or cancer cells, and they're programmed to find those types of things and kill those cells. Okay, that was an introduction to the second lines of defense. In the fourth lecture, we're going to talk more about this leukocyte white blood cell army of the second line and what some of their jobs are going to be. In lab, we're going to take a look at white blood cells on slides under the microscope. We'll do that later this week as a lab exercise. But lecture number 4, we'll talk more about the special jobs of this leukocyte army of your second line defenses.